Antonio Moretti hadn't believed in ghosts until the moment a dead girl's necklace walked through his penthouse door around the neck of a pizza delivery woman who had no idea she was wearing 20 years of his guilt, rage, and unanswered prayers. The Silver Saint's medallion caught the light as she shifted the pizza boxes, and Antonio felt something inside his chest crack open. The same medallion his twin sister Maria had been wearing the night she was taken from a cafe in Little Italy, the night the Bratva had destroyed his family and turned him into the monster he'd become. He'd spent 2 decades hunting that piece of silver through every dark corner of the criminal underworld, following whispers and corpses and dead ends, and now it was here, hanging around the neck of an exhausted girl in a grease-stained jacket who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "You're mine now," he said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. The girl, Sophia, her name tag read, looked up at him with sharp green eyes that held no fear, only exhaustion and the kind of wit that came from surviving too much for too long. "Sir, I appreciate the dramatic flair, but I really just need the $27 for the pizzas and then we can discuss your whole possessive stranger vibe." Antonio didn't smile. He pulled her inside and locked the door, because whoever she was, wherever she'd gotten that medallion, she was the first real lead he'd had in 20 years of searching, and he would burn Manhattan to the ground before he let her walk away. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The address had blinked insistently on Sophia's cracked phone screen 15 minutes earlier, but the numbers felt wrong in a way she couldn't articulate, like they belonged to a different universe entirely. She was already 22 minutes behind schedule, and her boss had made it crystal clear that one more late delivery would mean docking an entire shift's pay, so she'd shouldered through the revolving glass doors of the Manhattan high-rise, 3 pizza boxes precariously stacked in her arms, the grease already seeping through the cardboard and onto her faded denim jacket. The lobby concierge hadn't even looked up from his tablet, accustomed to the parade of delivery workers who cycled through his marble temple every hour, and Sophia had slipped into the elevator before anyone could ask questions she didn't have answers to. Floor 40. The hallway had stretched before her like something from a design magazine, all burnished bronze fixtures and abstract art that probably represented someone's trust fund, and she double-checked the receipt because her gut was screaming that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong, but exhaustion had long ago beaten intuition into submission. 3 jobs, 4 hours of sleep, endless hustle just to stay afloat. This was her life now. A literature degree gathering dust in a drawer while she delivered overpriced food to people who'd never know what it felt like to choose between rent and groceries. Now, standing inside Antonio Moretti's penthouse with the door locked behind her, Sophia was rapidly recalculating every decision that had led to this moment. The penthouse was all dark wood and leather, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering Manhattan skyline like a throne room overlooking a kingdom. But Sophia barely registered the luxury. She was too focused on the man who'd just imprisoned her, who was staring at her throat, no, at the medallion, like it held the answers to questions that had been keeping him awake for years. "Where did you get that?" His voice was quiet now, but somehow more terrifying for it. Controlled. Dangerous. Sophia clutched the pizza boxes like a shield, her mind racing through exit strategies that all seemed laughably inadequate. Get what? The pizzas? Because technically they belong to whoever actually ordered them, which I'm starting to think wasn't you. The medallion. He moved closer, each step deliberate, and Sophia instinctively pressed back against the door. Antonio reached out slowly, carefully, like he was approaching something sacred or explosive, and his fingers brushed the Silver Saint hanging at her throat. His touch was surprisingly gentle, reverent even, and when he looked up at her, his dark eyes were blazing with an emotion so raw it made her chest tighten. "Where did you get this?" It wasn't a question. It was a command wrapped in barely controlled desperation. Sophia's hand flew up instinctively to cover the medallion. Protective. "My grandmother gave it to me before she died. It's been in my family for... Why does it matter? It's just a necklace. Just a necklace. Antonio's laugh was bitter, hollow. He stepped back, running a hand through his dark hair. And for the first time, Sophia noticed the exhaustion etched into the lines of his face, the weight of something heavy and old pressing down on those broad shoulders. That just a necklace belonged to my twin sister. I watched her wear it every day for 16 years until the night she was taken from me. That was 20 years ago. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Sophia's tired brain struggled to process. That's impossible. My grandmother said this was hers, that it came from Italy with her family. Santa Caterina da Siena, Antonio interrupted, his voice soft but certain. Patron saint of Italy, there's an inscription on the back. Proteggi il mio cuore. Protect my heart. I had it engraved for Maria's 16th birthday, 3 days before she disappeared. Sophia's fingers trembled as she unclasped the necklace, turning it over. The inscription was there, worn but legible, exactly as he'd described. The pizza boxes slipped from her other arm, landing on the hardwood floor with a muted thud that neither of them acknowledged. How... Her voice came out smaller than she intended. How did my grandmother have your sister's necklace? Antonio's expression shifted, hardening into something cold and calculating. That's what you're going to help me find out, because either your grandmother was involved in my sister's disappearance, or she knew who was. And after 20 years of dead ends and false leads, you... He gestured at her, at the medallion, at everything she represented. You are the first real answer I've had. Sophia's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her temples. I don't know anything about your sister. My grandmother died 6 years ago. She never mentioned any of this, never said anything about... Then we have a problem. Antonio moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette dark against the glittering city beyond. Because that medallion makes you either my best lead or my worst enemy. And until I know which, you're not leaving. The casual certainty in his voice sent ice through Sophia's veins. You can't just keep me here. This is kidnapping. I have a job. I have 3 jobs, Antonio said, turning to face her. Pizza delivery, waitressing at Lou's Diner, and weekend shifts at the NYU bookstore. You live in a 4th-floor walk-up in Washington Heights with 2 roommates who work opposite shifts from you, which means no one will notice you're missing for at least 12 hours. Your student loans are in default, your car is 2 payments from repossession, and you haven't called your caseworker in 8 months. Sophia felt her blood turn to ice. How do you... I'm very good at finding information about people, Antonio said simply. I've had about 7 minutes since you walked in to learn everything about your life. And here's what I know. You're resourceful, resilient, and you've survived things that would have broken weaker people. Which means you're exactly the kind of person who can help me figure out how your grandmother ended up with my sister's necklace. And if I refuse? Antonio crossed the space between them in 3 strides, close enough that Sophia could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell the expensive cologne mixing with something darker, more dangerous. Then I make you a different offer. I'm a very wealthy man, Sophia, obscenely wealthy, and I'm guessing that someone working 3 jobs to stay afloat could use a substantial financial incentive. You're trying to bribe me. I'm offering you a contract. He pulled out his phone, typed something rapidly. 1 week. You stay here, you tell me everything your grandmother ever mentioned about that medallion. You help me trace its history. In exchange, I pay off every debt you have. Student loans, medical bills, credit cards, all of it. Gone. Plus $200,000 cash. Sophia's breath caught. That kind of money would change her entire life. But the man offering it looked like he was carved from marble and violence, and the way he was staring at the medallion around her neck suggested this was about far more than information. And if I still want to leave? She asked, proud that her voice stayed steady. Antonio's smile was sharp, predatory. Then I'll remind you that you're standing in the penthouse of a man who spent 20 years becoming very, very good at making people do what he wants. But I'd rather you stay willingly. I'd rather— He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features before disappearing behind the mask of control. I'd rather you choose to help me find my sister. Sophia looked at this dangerous, compelling stranger, at the desperation barely hidden beneath his calculated exterior, at the way his hands clenched every time his gaze drifted to the medallion. She thought about her grandmother's trembling hands pressing the silver saint into her palm, the whispered words in Italian she'd never fully understood. Keep this close. Keep this secret. Maybe her grandmother's secrets were finally demanding to be heard. 1 week, Sophia said, lifting her chin. Full transparency, no more cryptic mob boss threats, and you order me actual food, not whatever 5-star nonsense you people eat. Deal? Antonio extended his hand, and when Sophia took it, his grip was warm and certain. Deal. Welcome to your new life. Sophia Edwards. She had no idea how right he was. Antonio released her hand but didn't step back, and Sophia realized with uncomfortable clarity that personal space was going to be a negotiable concept for the foreseeable future. He gestured toward the sprawling living area, all dark leather and chrome that probably cost more than her entire neighborhood. Sit. We have details to discuss. I'll stand, thanks. Sophia crossed her arms, the medallion now tucked safely inside her shirt, though she could still feel its weight against her skin like a brand. And before we discuss anything, I need you to understand something. I'm agreeing to help you, not to be your prisoner. There's a difference. Antonio's eyebrow lifted, the ghost of amusement flickering across his severe features. Is there? Yes. Prisoners don't negotiate. I do. She met his gaze head-on, refusing to let the intensity of those dark eyes make her falter. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to explain exactly what you think happened to your sister, what you expect from me, and why you're so convinced that necklace is the key to finding her. Then I'm going to decide if your money is worth dealing with whatever complicated mob drama I've apparently walked into. For a long moment, Antonio just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a real smile that transformed his face from dangerously handsome to something that made Sophia's traitorous heart skip. You have no idea what you've walked into, do you? Not even a little bit, Sophia admitted, but I'm a quick study. And I'm guessing you didn't become obscenely wealthy by working with people who just nod and say yes to everything. No, Antonio said slowly, moving to a sleek bar cart and pouring 2 glasses of something amber that probably cost more than her monthly rent. I became obscenely wealthy by eliminating people who told me no. He held out a glass to her. But you're right. I prefer intelligence over obedience. It's more useful. Sophia took the glass but didn't drink. That's supposed to be reassuring? It's supposed to be honest. Antonio gestured again toward the seating area, and this time Sophia moved, perching on the edge of a leather armchair that was somehow both intimidating and the most comfortable thing she'd ever sat on. Antonio remained standing, silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows and the Manhattan skyline beyond. My sister Maria and I were 16 when she was taken. We were eating dinner at our family's restaurant in Little Italy, our father's place, nothing fancy, just good food and loud conversation. Maria went outside to take a phone call. She never came back. His voice was steady, almost detached, but Sophia could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand tightened around his glass. The police investigated. Found nothing. My father called in favors with everyone he knew, legitimate and otherwise, still nothing. Maria just vanished. The only thing we knew for certain was that she was wearing that medallion when she disappeared, because I'd watched her clasp it on before we left the house. Antonio finally looked at her. and the raw pain in his eyes made Sophia's chest ache. For 20 years I've searched. I've become someone my father would have been ashamed of, built an empire on things I'm not proud of, all to find the people who took her, and then you walk through my door wearing the one piece of evidence that proves she existed after that night. Sophia's fingers instinctively went to her throat, to the medallion hidden beneath her shirt. My grandmother, she came to New York from Italy in the early 2000s. She never talked much about her life before, always said the past was meant to stay buried, but she told me this necklace would protect me, that it carried the prayers of someone who loved me. She paused, processing the timeline. Your sister disappeared in 2005? September 14th, 2005. My grandmother arrived in New York in January 2006. Sophia's mind raced, connecting dots she didn't want to connect. Antonio, if your sister was taken by traffickers or worse, then your grandmother either knew the people who took her or she found the necklace somehow and kept it. Antonio's voice was hard now, controlled fury barely leashed. Either way, it means there's a connection, and that connection makes you valuable. To me, because you're my only lead, but also to whoever took Maria, if they find out you exist. The implications settled over Sophia like ice water. You think I'm in danger. I know you're in danger. Antonio crossed to her, crouching down so they were eye level, and the sudden proximity made Sophia's breath catch. The moment someone sees you wearing that medallion and recognizes it, you become a liability, which means you can't go back to your apartment, your jobs, your normal life, not until I find out the truth. So I'm not just helping you, Sophia said slowly. I'm hiding. You're surviving. Antonio's hand came up, hovering near her face but not quite touching. I'm very good at keeping things I value safe, Sophia. Let me keep you safe. There was something in his voice, something possessive and protective and entirely too intense, that made warning bells ring in Sophia's head, even as a different part of her responded to the raw sincerity in his eyes. Okay, she said, surprised by her own certainty. But we're establishing ground rules because I've seen enough Mafia movies to know how this could go sideways. Antonio's lips quirked. Ground rules? First, I get my own bedroom with a lock on the inside. Second, I need my laptop and some clothes from my apartment. We'll figure out how to do that safely. Third, she pointed at him, summoning every ounce of fake confidence she possessed. You feed me real food. None of this molecular gastronomy nonsense. I want carbs, I want cheese, and I want portions that acknowledge I'm not a supermodel eating for the aesthetic. For the first time since she'd knocked on his door, Antonio laughed, a genuine, startled sound that transformed his entire demeanor. You're negotiating your captivity based on portion sizes? I'm negotiating my cooperation based on basic human dignity, Sophia corrected. You want me to dig through 20-year-old family secrets and potentially repressed memories? I'm doing it on a full stomach. Antonio stood, extending his hand again. Deal. Though I should warn you, my chef is trained in classical Italian cuisine. You're going to eat better than you have in your entire life. We'll see about that. I make a mean boxed mac and cheese. Sophia took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. She found herself standing too close to him again, close enough to see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the silver threading through the dark hair at his temples. Close enough to realize that danger could be devastatingly attractive when it looked at you like you were the answer to every question it had been asking. There's one more thing, Antonio said, his voice dropping low. The people I work with, the world I operate in, they can't know why you're really here. As far as anyone knows, you're my companion. Someone I've chosen to keep close. Your girlfriend, Sophia translated flatly. My lover, Antonio corrected, and the word sent heat flooding through Sophia's cheeks. It's the only explanation that will keep you safe and keep my people from asking too many questions. Sophia extracted her hand from his, needing the distance to think clearly. So, I'm trapped in your penthouse, pretending to be your girlfriend, while we investigate whether my dead grandmother was somehow connected to your sister's kidnapping. That's the arrangement? That's the arrangement. Antonio's expression was serious again, all business. Can you do it? Sophia thought about her mounting debts, her 3 soul-crushing jobs, her tiny apartment with its broken heating and loud neighbors. She thought about her grandmother's trembling hands and whispered warnings, about secrets that had followed her across an ocean and 2 decades. She thought about the dangerous, complicated man standing before her, offering her a way out and a way forward, even if the path was paved with lies and risk. "I can do it," she said. "But Antonio, when this is over, when we figure out what happened, I get to walk away. No strings, no obligations, no 'you're mine' declarations. I help you find your sister, you clear my debts, and we part ways. Agreed?" Antonio held her gaze for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in those dark eyes. Then he nodded, though Sophia had the distinct Antonio held her gaze for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in those dark eyes. Then he nodded, though Sophia had the distinct impression he was agreeing to terms he had no intention of honoring. Agreed. 3 days later, Sophia was discovering that living with a mafia boss was 90% boredom punctuated by 10% absolute terror. She'd been given the guest suite, all slate gray and chrome with a bathroom bigger than her old bedroom, and true to his word, Antonio had arranged for some of her belongings to be retrieved from her apartment. What he hadn't mentioned was that retrieved meant acquired by large, intimidating men while your roommates were conveniently out. She'd found her laptop, clothes, and her embarrassingly large collection of paperback romance novels waiting for her on the bed, arranged with almost comical precision. Now she sat in Antonio's home office. He'd insisted she call it our office, which felt presumptuous, surrounded by monitors displaying security feeds, financial data, and what appeared to be shipping manifests. Antonio conducted his business with ruthless efficiency, switching between English and rapid Italian depending on who was on the phone, and Sophia had learned to make herself invisible during calls, curled up in the leather chair by the window with her laptop and her grandmother's old journals. "Sophia." She looked up to find Antonio watching her, phone finally set aside. His dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and there was something unfairly attractive about the casual dishevelment. "Yeah? Come here. I want you to look at something." Sophia uncurled from her chair and moved to his desk, acutely aware of how domestic this had all become. The casual command, her automatic compliance, the comfortable silence that had developed between them. She leaned over his shoulder to study the monitor, and caught the faint scent of his cologne mixed with coffee and something distinctly him. "These are shipment logs from my warehouse operations," Antonio explained, pulling up a series of spreadsheets. "Standard inventory tracking. My logistics manager reviews them weekly, flags any discrepancies." "Okay," Sophia said slowly, scanning the rows of data. "And you're showing me this because you've spent 3 years navigating delivery routes through Manhattan. You understand logistics, timing, traffic patterns." He pulled up another screen. "Tell me if you see anything unusual." Sophia studied the manifests, her eyes tracking the columns of numbers and timestamps. At first everything looked standard, shipments arriving, inventory processed, distribution scheduled, but then something caught her eye. A small inconsistency that nagged at her the way a wrong address used to. "This shipment here," she pointed at the screen. "It's marked as arriving at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, processed within 30 minutes, and cleared for distribution by 3:15. Correct? That's normal timing. Except it's not." Sophia pulled up another window, finding what she was looking for. Tuesday was the UN General Assembly. Midtown was completely gridlocked from noon until 7 p.m. I know because I had 6 late deliveries that day and got screamed at by every single customer. She tapped the timestamp. There's no way a truck made it from the port to your warehouse in Red Hook, unloaded and processed inventory in under an hour. Not with that traffic, it should have taken 3 hours minimum. Antonio went very still. You're certain? I'm certain that either your truck has magical traffic bypassing powers, or someone logged a shipment that never actually arrived when they said it did. Sophia straightened, crossing her arms. Which, in my extremely limited understanding of criminal enterprise, seems like the kind of thing you'd want to investigate. Antonio was already pulling up additional files, his expression darkening as he cross-referenced data. Marco oversees that warehouse. He's been with me for 8 years, completely trusted. But his voice had taken on an edge that made Sophia nervous. If he's skimming inventory or falsifying records... Hey. Sophia touched his shoulder without thinking, felt the tension coiled there. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe the timestamps are just wrong. Or, there's always an explanation, Antonio said quietly. The question is whether it's one I can live with. He looked up at her, something calculating behind his eyes. You have good instincts, Sophia. Better than some people I pay considerably more than I'm paying you. You're not paying me, you're bribing me. There's a difference. His lips quirked. Semantics. He stood abruptly, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. Come with me, we're going to the warehouse. Sophia blinked. Now? It's almost midnight. Exactly. If Marco is running a side operation, midnight is when it would happen. Antonio was already moving toward the door, then paused when he realized she wasn't following. Problem? Several, actually. Sophia gestured at her oversized NYU sweatshirt and leggings. Starting with the fact that I'm not exactly dressed for a covert warehouse investigation, and ending with the fact that I'm a pizza delivery driver, not a criminal consultant, I spotted a weird timestamp. That doesn't make me qualified for field work. Antonio crossed back to her in 3 strides, and suddenly he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You're qualified because you notice things other people miss. You're qualified because you think like someone who understands logistics, not violence, and you're qualified— His hand came up, fingertips barely brushing her jaw. Because I trust you, which is not something I give easily. The touch was electric, sending awareness flooding through Sophia's nervous system. She should step back, establish boundaries, remind him this was a business arrangement. Instead, she found herself leaning fractionally closer. If someone starts shooting, I'm using you as a human shield, she said, her voice coming out breathier than intended. Antonio's smile was sharp, predatory, and devastatingly attractive. If someone starts shooting, you'll be behind me before you can blink. Now go change into something dark. We leave in 5 minutes. The warehouse was exactly what Sophia expected, cavernous, dimly lit, smelling of concrete and diesel fuel. What she didn't expect was how comfortable Antonio looked here, moving through shadows like he was born to them, one hand resting casually on her lower back to guide her forward. "Stay close," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "And if I tell you to run, you run. Don't argue, don't hesitate. Understood?" "You're really selling the safety aspect of this arrangement," Sophia whispered back. But she pressed closer to his side, hyper-aware of the gun she'd watched him holster before they left. They moved through rows of shipping containers and industrial shelving, Antonio checking each section with methodical precision. Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs, adrenaline making every shadow menacing, every sound amplified. Then Antonio stopped abruptly, his arm coming out to block her path. Ahead, light spilled from an office door that should have been dark. Voices carried in the quiet, low, urgent, speaking Italian too rapid for Sophia to follow. Antonio's expression was granite. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then pocketed it again. "Marco's here, with Vito. My capo. Is that bad?" "It's unauthorized." Antonio's voice was cold, all the warmth she'd grown accustomed to evaporating into something dangerous. Wait here. Don't move. Antonio. But he was already moving, crossing the distance to the office with lethal purpose. Sophia watched him disappear through the doorway, heard raised voices, then an abrupt, heavy silence that made her stomach drop. She counted to 30 before her worry overrode her self-preservation. Moving as quietly as possible, she crept toward the office, pressing herself against the wall just outside the door. "Just business, capo," Marco was saying, his voice tight with fear. "Small side operation. Nothing that affects your bottom line." "Everything affects my bottom line when you're stealing from me." Antonio's voice was arctic. "How long?" "6 months. Maybe 8. "And Vito? How long have you been covering for him?" Silence. Then Vito's voice, smooth and unconcerned. "Marco works for me, Antonio. Has for over a year. Your problem isn't the skimming. Your problem is that you've gone soft, letting some girl wander around your office, trusting her observations over your own people." The sound of impact made Sophia flinch, something hitting something else with brutal force. "Don't!" Antonio's voice was lethal now. "Don't speak about her. In fact, don't speak at all until I decide whether you're valuable enough to keep breathing." Sophia's heart was racing. She should run, should get back to where Antonio left her, but her feet stayed planted. Because beneath the fear, beneath the very rational terror of being anywhere near Mafia violence, there was something else. Antonio had defended her. Had gone cold and dangerous the moment Vito mentioned her. She was still processing that when Antonio emerged from the office, his knuckles split and bleeding, his expression murderous. He saw her immediately, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, then resignation, then something that might have been relief. "I told you to stay back." "You did," Sophia agreed, moving to him without thinking. She grabbed his injured hand, examining the damage with automatic concern honed from years of watching her grandmother patch up neighborhood kids. "You also punched someone, apparently. He insulted you. So you hit him?" "I showed restraint. I wanted to do much worse." Antonio was watching her with an intensity that made her skin feel too tight. "You should be afraid of me right now, Sophia. You should be demanding I take you home." Sophia looked up at him, at the violence simmering beneath his controlled surface, at the blood on his knuckles and the fierce protectiveness in his eyes. She should be afraid. Any rational person would be. Instead, she felt something else entirely, something dangerous and magnetic and entirely too compelling. "Take me home," she said softly. "Home to your penthouse. Because apparently I'm terrible at self-preservation and you're terrible at keeping distance." Her fingers were still wrapped around his injured hand, her thumb brushing across his knuckles with unconscious tenderness. "And Antonio? Thank you for defending me." The look he gave her was raw, unguarded, like she'd cracked something open that he'd been keeping carefully sealed. His free hand came up, cupping her face with surprising gentleness, and for one electric moment Sophia thought he might kiss her. Instead, he rested his forehead against hers, his breath ragged. "You're going to destroy me, Sophia Edwards." "Good," she whispered back, "because you've been destroying me since I knocked on your door." They didn't speak during the drive back to the penthouse. Antonio's driver navigated the empty Manhattan streets, while Sophia sat beside him in the back seat, her hand still wrapped around his injured one, neither of them willing to break the connection. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, heavy with things unsaid and emotions too raw to name. When they finally stepped into the penthouse, the city lights spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows felt almost accusatory, illuminating everything they'd been carefully avoiding. "Let me clean your hand," Sophia said, her voice quiet in the vast space. Antonio nodded, following her to the kitchen, the one room in his pristine penthouse that actually felt human, probably because it was the only place she'd claimed as partially hers. She retrieved the first aid kit from under the sink, gesturing for him to sit at the island while she gathered supplies. The intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. Sophia standing between his legs as he sat on the bar stool, her fingers gentle as she cleaned the split knuckles, Antonio watching her face with an intensity that made her hyper-aware of every breath, every slight movement. "You didn't have to hit him," she said softly, dabbing antiseptic on the wounds. "Yes, I did." Antonio's voice was rough. "He called you a distraction, implied you were making me weak." "Maybe I am." Sophia met his eyes, her hands stilling on his. "Making you weak, I mean. You've spent 20 years building walls, and here I am, 3 days in, standing in your kitchen at 2 a.m. playing nurse. You're not making me weak." Antonio caught her wrist gently, holding her in place. "You're making me remember what it feels like to be human. There's a difference." Sophia's heart stuttered. "Antonio—" "Ask me," he interrupted, his thumb tracing small circles on the inside of her wrist. "Ask me what you've been wanting to ask since the moment you walked through my door. About Maria, about the medallion, about why I can't let this go." Sophia set down the antiseptic, her full attention on him now. "Tell me about her. Not about what happened to her. Tell me about who she was, before." Something shifted in Antonio's expression, the hard edges softening into something achingly vulnerable. "Maria was—" He paused, struggling with words in a way Sophia had never seen from him. "She was my twin, but she was nothing like me. I was always serious, focused, trying to live up to our father's expectations. Maria was light. She laughed at everything, found joy in stupid things like pigeons in the park or the way rain sounded on windows. She used to drive me crazy with her optimism." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, there and gone. "The night she disappeared, we were arguing. Something trivial. I can't even remember what. She called me boring, said I needed to live a little. Those were the last words she said to me before she went outside." His voice cracked slightly. 20 years later, I'm still boring, still serious, still living like she was right, and I wasted every moment I had with her being the responsible one." Sophia's chest ached. Without thinking, she cupped his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. "You were 16, Antonio. You were being a brother. You couldn't have known. I should have protected her." The words came out fierce, anguished. "That's what older brothers do, even if it's only by 6 minutes. I should have gone outside with her, should have insisted, but I was too busy being angry about some forgotten slight, and by the time I realized she'd been gone too long—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "They found her phone 3 blocks away, smashed. No blood, no signs of struggle, nothing. Just gone." "And the medallion?" "I had it made for her 16th birthday because she was obsessed with saints, with the idea that someone was watching over us. Santa Caterina da Siena, St. Catherine of Siena, was her favorite. The patron saint of Italy, of nurses, of fire prevention." Antonio's laugh was bitter. "Maria wanted to be a nurse, said she wanted to help people make them better. I thought it was naive. Now I'd give anything to tell her she was right, that helping people matters more than power or revenge or any of this." Sophia's throat was tight. "She sounds extraordinary." "She was. And when I saw that medallion around your neck, it was like—" Antonio's hands came up to cover hers, still cradling his face. "It was like the universe was giving me one more chance, to find out what happened, to bring her home, even if it's just her memory, to make the last 20 years of becoming a monster mean something." "You're not a monster," Sophia said fiercely. "Yes, I am. I've done things, terrible things, in the name of finding her, hurt people, destroyed lives, built an empire on blood and fear because power meant resources, meant information. Every decision I've made since that night has been about becoming dangerous enough that no one could ever take something from me again." He pulled her hands from his face, holding them between his own. "And then you walk through my door with your terrible timing and sharp mouth and complete inability to be intimidated, and suddenly I remember what it feels like to want something other than revenge." Sophia's pulse was racing. Antonio. Your turn, he said quietly. You know my deepest wound. Tell me yours. Tell me why you understand what it means to survive. For a long moment, Sophia considered deflecting with humor, the way she always did. But Antonio had given her raw truth, had trusted her with his most vulnerable pieces. She owed him the same honesty. I was 8 when my mother left me at a fire station, she said, the words coming out steadier than she expected. Not abandoned. She was very clear about that. She couldn't keep me safe anymore, she said. Couldn't protect me from my father, who was dangerous in ways I didn't understand until I was older. So she gave me to the state and disappeared, and I spent the next 10 years in the foster system learning that the only person I could rely on was myself. Antonio's grip on her hands tightened. My grandmother found me when I was 18. Tracked me down through some bureaucratic miracle and showed up at my group home like an avenging angel in orthopedic shoes. She didn't explain where she'd been or why she'd never looked for me before. She just said, "You're mine now." Sophia's voice caught on the echo of Antonio's own words, and took me home. Gave me 3 years of family before lung cancer took her, and when she died, she pressed that medallion into my hand and told me to keep it close, keep it secret, keep myself safe. She was protecting you, Antonio said, understanding dawning in his eyes, from whoever gave her that medallion, from the connection to Maria. Maybe, or maybe she was protecting herself. I'll never know now. Sophia blinked back tears. But I learned early that nothing is permanent, that everyone leaves, that the only way to survive is to stay ready to run. 3 jobs, minimal possessions, no real attachments. It's not ambition, Antonio. It's armor. Sophia? And then you locked me in here and told me I was yours, and I should have been terrified, should have fought harder to leave, but instead, she looked up at him, letting him see the truth in her eyes. Instead, for the first time in 15 years, I feel like maybe I don't have to run. Like maybe someone is finally strong enough to stand between me and whatever's coming. The air between them was electric, charged with recognition and need, and something far more dangerous than attraction. Antonio stood slowly, his hands sliding from hers to her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. I won't let anything hurt you, he said, his voice low and fierce. Whatever connection your grandmother had to Maria's disappearance, whatever danger that brings, I'll burn the world down before I let it touch you. That's a very dramatic declaration for someone you've known less than a week, Sophia whispered, but her hands were already sliding up his chest, feeling his heart hammer beneath her palms. I'm Italian. Dramatic is our baseline. His forehead rested against hers, the gesture now familiar and devastatingly intimate. And I don't need more than a week to know that you've already changed everything. Antonio. Sophia. Her name was a prayer and a plea. Tell me to stop. Tell me this is just the adrenaline, just 2 damaged people finding comfort in shared trauma. Tell me I'm wrong about this. About us. Sophia looked up at him, at the fierce protectiveness and raw vulnerability written across his features, at the man who'd defended her honor with violence and held her hands with gentleness. She thought about all her carefully constructed defenses, about the armor she'd built to keep herself safe, about the vow she'd made to never let anyone close enough to hurt her. And then she rose up on her toes and kissed him. The world narrowed to the point of contact, his lips on hers, firm and seeking and somehow both demanding and reverent. Antonio made a sound low in his throat, his hands tightening on her waist, pulling her flush against him. The kiss deepened, became something urgent and desperate. 20 years of his grief meeting 15 years of her loneliness in a collision that felt like inevitability. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Antonio rested his forehead against hers again, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious. You're mine now, he said. But this time it wasn't a claim or a command. It was a vow. And I'm yours. If you'll have me, monster and all. Sophia smiled, her fingers threading through his hair. I've never been afraid of monsters, Antonio. Only of the people who pretend to be saints. He kissed her again, softer this time, full of promise and possibility. And for the first time since she was 8 years old, Sophia Edwards let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found somewhere she didn't need to run from. The morning after their first kiss, Sophia woke to find Antonio's side of the bed cold and empty. Not that they'd shared a bed. She'd eventually retreated to her own room around 4 a.m., both of them needing space to process what had shifted between them. But she'd felt his absence anyway. The penthouse too quiet, too still. She found him in his office, surrounded by 3 laptops and twice as many coffee cups, looking like he hadn't slept at all. His dress shirt was wrinkled, sleeves rolled up, and there was an intensity to his focus that made her hesitate in the doorway. You're staring, Antonio said without looking up. You're working yourself to death, Sophia countered, moving into the room. It's 7 a.m. When did you even come to bed? Sorry, to your room? I didn't. He finally looked at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her chest ache. After you left, I started thinking about Marco and Vito, about the warehouse. Something's been bothering me. Sophia perched on the edge of his desk, close enough that their knees brushed. What, something? Vito was too calm last night. Marco was terrified, but Vito... Antonio shook his head. He looked at me like he was watching a chess match he'd already won. And when I mentioned you, when I defended you, he smiled. Just for a second. But I saw it. A chill ran down Sophia's spine. You think he wanted you to react that way? I think he's been waiting for me to show weakness. And apparently you're my weakness now. Antonio reached for her hand, threading their fingers together like it was already habit. Which means I need to be more careful. We need to be more careful. Over the next 3 days, Sophia learned what careful meant in Antonio Moretti's world. It meant armed guards stationed on their floor. It meant Antonio's driver doing counter-surveillance routes that added 40 minutes to every trip. It meant she wasn't allowed to leave the penthouse at all, not even for the late-night bodega runs she'd grown accustomed to. It also meant she had nothing to do but observe, and Sophia was very, very good at observing. She noticed that Vito called Antonio exactly 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, evening, like clockwork. Too regular to be natural, too predictable to be coincidence. She noticed that he was the only one of Antonio's associates who never asked to meet in person, always preferring phone calls or encrypted messages. And she noticed, during the one video conference she'd sat in on, that Vito's eyes had flickered to her medallion, which she'd started wearing outside her shirt again, a small rebellion against fear, and something cold had crossed his face before the professional mask slammed back into place. He recognized it, she told Antonio that evening as they shared dinner. Real food, as promised, from his chef who'd learned Sophia's preferences and now cooked accordingly. Vito. He saw the medallion during that call, and he knew what it was. Antonio set down his fork carefully. You're certain? I'm certain he reacted. I can't prove what he was thinking, but... Sophia paused, trying to articulate the instinct that had served her so well during her delivery days. It's like when you're driving the same route every day and suddenly someone's parked in a spot they've never used before. Technically nothing's wrong, but your brain flags it anyway because the pattern's off. And Vito's pattern is off. Everything about Vito is off. Sophia pushed her pasta around her plate, her appetite fading. He's too smooth, too controlled. And the way he talks to you, it's respectful, but there's something underneath, like he's performing respect rather than feeling it. Antonio was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he pulled out his phone and scrolled through something. Vito has been with me for 6 years. Started as muscle, worked his way up to capo. He's smart, efficient, loyal, or so I thought. When did you tell him about Maria's case? About the medallion? Everyone in my organization knows I've been searching for my sister. It's not a secret." Antonio's jaw tightened. "But the specific details about the medallion, I only shared those with my inner circle about 8 months ago, after a lead suggested it had surfaced somewhere in New York." Sophia's blood ran cold, and 3 months later, my grandmother died. Antonio, what if that wasn't coincidence? What if someone found out she had the medallion and— "Don't!" Antonio's voice was sharp. "Don't go there. Your grandmother died of lung cancer. The hospital records are clear." "Okay. But what if someone knew she was dying and waited for the medallion to pass to someone new, someone easier to track?" Sophia stood abruptly, pacing to the windows. The city glittered below, oblivious to the dark currents running through its underworld. "I've been thinking about this all day. How did you find me so fast? I walked through your door wearing that medallion, and you recognized it immediately. But how did I end up at your door in the first place?" Antonio went very still. "The delivery app. You said the address was wrong." "It was wrong. I checked my phone 3 times because something felt off." Sophia spun to face him, her mind racing. "Antonio, what if the address wasn't wrong on the restaurant's end? What if someone rerouted my delivery? Hacked the app or paid someone to change the destination? That would mean someone wanted me to find you, wanted you to see the medallion." Sophia's voice was rising now, fear and realization crashing together. "Think about it. I'm nobody. I'm a pizza delivery driver with no connections, no protection, no idea what this necklace means. I walk into your life, you become obsessed with protecting me, and suddenly the big scary Mafia boss has a weakness everyone can see." Antonio was on his feet now, his phone already in his hand. "Luca," he barked when someone answered, "I need you to pull the delivery records from last week, every digital footprint on the pizza order that brought Sophia Edwards to my door, and I need it 5 minutes ago." While Antonio worked his phone, making rapid calls in Italian and English, Sophia's mind continued to spin. She thought about Vito's too smooth demeanor, his predictable call schedule, the way he'd looked at her medallion. She thought about delivery logistics, about how easy it would be to compromise a gig economy app if you knew what you were doing. And then she thought about something else. Antonio. He looked up from his 3rd call. The warehouse. When Vito was there with Marco, you said it was unauthorized, right? Yes. Neither of them should have been there at midnight. But Vito would have known you might show up. He's your capo. He knows your patterns, knows you do spot checks. Sophia's heart was hammering now. What if that wasn't about the skimming at all? What if he wanted you to find him there? Why would he want that? Because he needed you to see him as the loyal one. Marco's the one stealing Marco's the one who can't be trusted. But Vito? Vito stands there calm and collected, almost amused by the whole thing. He makes you think he's got everything under control. Sophia moved closer, urgent. And while you're focused on Marco's betrayal, you're not looking at Vito's. Antonio's expression had gone cold, dangerous. If you're right, if Vito orchestrated bringing you to me just to make me vulnerable, then he's playing a long game, Sophia finished. And we need to figure out what his endgame is before he makes his move. As if summoned by their speculation, Antonio's phone rang. Vito's name flashed on the screen. They stared at it for 2 rings before Antonio answered, his voice perfectly controlled. "Vito." Sophia couldn't hear the other end of the conversation, but she watched Antonio's face carefully. Saw the micro-expressions he couldn't quite hide, surprise, then calculation, then something that looked like grim understanding. "When?" Antonio asked. A pause. "No, that's fine. I'll be there, alone." Another pause, and his eyes flickered to Sophia. "I said I'll handle it. 2 hours." He ended the call and stood motionless for a moment, his knuckles white around the phone. "Antonio." "There's a meeting," he said slowly. "Emergency summit with the Castellano family. Neutral territory downtown. Vito says they've requested me specifically to discuss territorial disputes. His gaze met hers, and she saw the exact moment he understood. It's a trap. You can't go. If I don't go, it shows weakness, makes it clear I suspect something. Antonio moved to his desk, pulling up maps on his laptop. The location is the old textile factory in the garment district. Multiple entry points, lots of places for an ambush. Sophia looked over his shoulder at the screen, and something clicked in her memory. I know that building. I used to deliver to the coffee shop on the corner all the time. She pointed at the screen. That whole block is a logistics nightmare. Narrow streets, one-way traffic, limited parking. If you're going there at what time? 9 p.m. At 9 p.m. on a Friday, the traffic in that area is insane. Restaurant rush, theater crowds, delivery trucks. Sophia's delivery driver instincts were screaming now. Antonio, if someone wanted to trap you somewhere, that would be the perfect place. You can't get in or out quickly. There are too many witnesses for your guards to operate freely. And if something goes wrong, the police response would be immediate, Antonio finished, which means either the Castellanos are planning to kill me publicly and deal with the fallout, or someone's called in a tip, Sophia said, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. Someone who wants you arrested, wants you out of the way. Someone who benefits from you being in custody while they, what? Take over your operation? Cover their tracks? Antonio's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and his expression hardened further. Luca traced the delivery app hack. The modification came from inside my organization. Same IP address that accessed my calendar system last month, when someone would have known my schedule, known when I'd be home to answer the door. Vito, Sophia whispered. Vito, Antonio confirmed. He looked at her, and there was something fierce and protective and absolutely lethal in his eyes. He brought you into my life knowing I'd react exactly as I did, knowing I'd keep you close, become attached, and now he's using that attachment to lure me into whatever he has planned. So we don't play his game, Sophia said, moving closer. We change the rules. You said he's been with you for 6 years. He knows how you think, how you operate, so we do something he won't expect. Antonio cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. We? You're not going to that meeting alone, Sophia said firmly, and you're definitely not going at 9 p.m. like a sitting duck. We're going to use what Vito doesn't know, what none of your people know. Which is? Sophia smiled, sharp and determined. How to think like someone who's spent 3 years navigating this city the hard way, street level, off the grid, the exact places your world never looks. Antonio kissed her then, hard and fast and full of something that felt like hope mixed with terror. When he pulled back, his eyes were blazing. Tell me your plan. And Sophia did. Chapter 6. The delivery route. The unique insight. Sophia spread a crumpled delivery map across Antonio's desk, an actual paper map she'd kept from her early days driving, covered in her own handwritten notes about shortcuts, loading zones, and which buildings had the friendliest doormen. Antonio's high-tech operation suddenly looked quaint next to her analog chaos. Okay, so the textile factory is here? She tapped the location. And Vito wants you there at 9 p.m., which is absolutely the worst possible time for that neighborhood. Theater traffic, dinner rush, tourists everywhere. Antonio leaned over the map, his presence warm at her back. Which makes it impossible for my security team to position effectively. Exactly. Too many witnesses for a shootout, but too much chaos for them to protect you properly. Sophia traced the streets around the factory with her finger. But here's what's interesting. I delivered to this area probably 300 times, and there's exactly one way to get large vehicles in and out efficiently. She circled a narrow alley 2 blocks east of the factory. Service entrance. It's technically not on any official maps because it's private access for the restaurant supply companies. But every delivery driver in Manhattan knows about it because it's the only way to avoid the gridlock on 8th Avenue. Antonio studied the map intently. And you think Vito knows about this entrance? I think Vito is counting on it. Sophia said. Look at the setup. He calls you to a meeting at the worst possible time, in the worst possible location for your security. But he's your capo. He knows you'll try to adapt, try to find an alternative route, and if you're smart, if you're thinking tactically, you'll use the service entrance because it's the only logical option. Which means he'll have people waiting there. Or worse. Sophia pulled out her phone, scrolling to a news article she'd found during her research. Remember how I said the police response in that area would be immediate? 3 weeks ago, NYPD announced a new initiative targeting organized crime in the garment district. Increased patrols, undercover operations, the whole thing. It was all over the local news. Antonio's expression darkened. If Vito tips them off about suspicious activity at that service entrance, you drive right into a police trap, and suddenly the dangerous Mafia boss is in custody, his operation is in chaos, and Vito is the obvious choice to take over while you're dealing with federal charges. Sophia met his eyes. It's actually kind of brilliant, in a completely evil way. You sound almost impressed. I'm impressed by the logistics, Sophia admitted. The execution, however, deserves a solid F for morally reprehensible. She turned back to the map, her mind working through possibilities. But here's the thing about being a delivery driver. You learn that there's always another way. Always. You just have to know where to look. She pointed to a building adjacent to the factory. This is a commercial laundry service, runs 24/7 because they service all the restaurants and hotels in the area. I used to deliver to their night manager every Friday. He was addicted to chicken tikka masala and tipped like a king. Sophia, we don't have time for a culinary review. Shut up, I'm getting there. She poked him in the chest, and despite the tension, he smiled. The laundry has its own freight elevator system. Old, clunky, barely maintained, but it connects to the underground service tunnels that run beneath half the garment district. Original infrastructure from the 1920s, when these were all textile factories. Antonio straightened, understanding dawning. You're saying I can access the meeting location through the tunnels? I'm saying you can access the meeting location, confirm whether it's actually legitimate or a complete setup, and have an escape route that Vito would never think to cover. Sophia traced the tunnel system on her map. These aren't on any city plans anymore. They're not sealed off, just forgotten. The only people who know about them are old-timers and delivery drivers who've been working the area forever. And you've been in these tunnels? Once, when I was desperate during a snowstorm and the night manager took pity on me. Sophia shrugged. They're creepy as hell, probably violate about 40 safety codes, and smell like industrial detergent mixed with despair. But they work. Antonio pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. You're telling me that my entire security operation missed this, but you found it because of chicken tikka masala. Hey, never underestimate the intelligence-gathering potential of food delivery. Sophia leaned into him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. We see everything, go everywhere, and people forget we're paying attention because we're just there to drop off dinner. You're extraordinary, Antonio said softly, and the wonder in his voice made her chest ache. I'm observant, she corrected. There's a difference. No, there isn't. He turned her to face him fully, his hands cradling her face. In 6 days, you've done what years of professional investigators couldn't. You've seen patterns, made connections, found vulnerabilities. His voice caught. You've given me the first real chance I've had in 20 years to end this. The weight of his words settled over them both. This wasn't just about surviving Vito's trap anymore. This was about finally closing the circle that had opened the night Maria disappeared. Antonio, Sophia said carefully, if we do this, if we prove Vito is behind everything, we still don't know what happened to your sister. The medallion being in my grandmother's possession doesn't explain how it got there or where Maria is now. I know. Antonio's thumbs brushed her cheekbones, the gesture achingly tender. But for the first time since that night, I'm not just chasing ghosts. I have a real lead, real evidence, and— He paused, his forehead resting against hers. I have someone I trust completely to help me find the truth, even if that truth destroys me. It won't destroy you, Sophia said fiercely. Whatever we find out about Maria, about my grandmother, about all of it, we'll face it together. You're not alone anymore. Neither are you. Antonio kissed her softly, and this time there was no urgency, just sweet certainty. When he pulled back, his expression had shifted into something harder, more focused. Tell me the rest of your plan, all of it. Sophia took a breath, centering herself. Okay, first, you tell Vito you're coming as requested. 9 p.m., the factory, all very predictable. You even take the obvious route so his surveillance confirms you're cooperating. But I'm not actually going to the factory. Oh, you're going. Just not the way he expects. Sophia pulled up a photo on her phone, the loading dock of the commercial laundry. Your driver drops you here at 8:30. You're meeting with the laundry owner about legitimate business investment. Antonio Moretti, respectable entrepreneur, expanding into commercial services. Very boring, very legal, totally explainable if anyone asks. Antonio's smile was sharp. And once I'm inside? The night manager, his name is Dennis, by the way, gives you access to the freight elevator. You take it down to the tunnel system, navigate east for approximately 300 yards, and emerge in the basement of the factory itself. She showed him the route on her map. From there, you can observe the meeting location without being exposed. If it's legitimate, you go upstairs and conduct your business. If it's a trap, I use the tunnels to escape while Vito is left wondering where I am. Exactly. Sophia looked up at him. But Antonio, this only works if Vito doesn't know about the tunnels. If he's done his homework, if he's covered this contingency. He hasn't. Antonio's voice was certain. Vito is smart, but he thinks like a soldier, not like someone who's had to survive on street-level resourcefulness. He'll have covered the obvious exits, the tactical positions, but forgotten infrastructure used by delivery drivers? He shook his head. That's not on his radar. I hope you're right. I'm right because you're brilliant. Antonio kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. But I need you to promise me something. Sophia's stomach tightened. What? You stay here. Locked down. Full security. His grip on her tightened when she started to protest. Sophia, if this goes wrong, if Vito realizes I'm not following his script, you become his next target. The medallion, your connection to Maria, your leverage against me now. Which is exactly why I should come with you, Sophia argued. If I'm here alone and something happens to you, nothing is going to happen to me. You don't know that. I know. Antonio's voice rose, then he forced himself to calm, his hands gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. I know that I survived 20 years of darkness because I had nothing to lose. I became a monster because there was no part of me left that was worth protecting, and then you walked through my door with your terrible timing and sharp wit and that damn medallion, and suddenly, his voice broke. Suddenly I have everything to lose. You are everything, Sophia. And I will not risk you, not for this, not for anything. Tears burned Sophia's eyes. You can't ask me to just wait here while you walk into danger. I'm not asking. Antonio's jaw was set, stubborn. I'm telling you that if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to face Vito and end this threat and finally get answers about Maria, I need to know you're safe. I need to know that even if the worst happens, you'll survive. You'll keep living, keep fighting, keep being exactly who you are. Antonio, please. The word was raw, stripped of pride. Please, Sophia. Let me protect you the way I couldn't protect Maria. Let me do this one thing right. Sophia looked at this man who'd claimed her as his, who'd offered her a future and uncovered her past, who was asking her to trust him with his life while staying behind. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to demand to go with him, to never let him face danger alone. But she understood what he wasn't saying, that he couldn't bear to watch someone else he loved be taken from him, that his strength came from knowing she was safe, not from having her by his side in the crossfire. "Okay," she whispered, "I'll stay. But Antonio, you come back to me. You finish this, and you come back because I'm not done with you yet. We have a deal, remember? You find your answers, I get my fresh start, and neither of us walks away until this story has an ending worth surviving for." Antonio pulled her against his chest, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you," he said into her hair. "I know it's too soon. I know it's complicated. But I love you, Sophia Edwards, and I'm coming back to you." "You better," Sophia said, her arms wrapping around him just as fiercely. "Because I love you too, you dramatic Italian disaster. And we're not done being extraordinary together." They held each other as the clock ticked toward 8 p.m., toward the moment when Antonio would walk into the darkness with nothing but Sophia's delivery driver knowledge and his own deadly competence to keep him alive. And Sophia prayed to her grandmother's saint that it would be enough. Antonio had been in the underground tunnels for exactly 8 minutes when he realized Sophia had been right about everything. The tunnels smelled exactly as she'd described: industrial detergent mixed with decades of accumulated grime and something that might have been mold or might have been existential despair. His phone's flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating brick walls covered in pipes and electrical conduits that probably hadn't been inspected since the Eisenhower administration. But the route was clear, and more importantly, it was unguarded. He emerged in the factory basement at 8:47 p.m., exactly on schedule. The space was cavernous and dark, filled with ancient machinery and the ghosts of Manhattan's industrial past. Above him, he could hear voices, multiple people moving around on the main floor. Too many people for a simple meeting. Antonio moved silently up the metal stairs, staying in the shadows, his hand resting on the gun holstered at his back. Through the gaps in the old stairwell, he could see the main floor, and his blood turned to ice. Vito stood in the center of the space, but he wasn't alone. 6 men flanked him, all armed, all watching the main entrance with predatory focus. No one from the Castellano family, no legitimate business meeting, just an execution waiting to happen. "He should be here in 5 minutes, Vito said, checking his watch. His voice carried clearly in the empty space. "When he comes through that door, we wait until he's fully inside. I want him alive long enough to understand exactly how thoroughly he's been played." One of the men shifted nervously. "And if he brings backup?" "He won't. Antonio Moretti's greatest weakness is his pride. He thinks he's smarter than everyone else, thinks his security is impenetrable." Vito's smile was cold. He has no idea his precious logistics consultant is exactly the vulnerability I created. The moment I saw that medallion in the files from the old Bratva operation, I knew. Get it to him. Let him become obsessed with solving his sister's disappearance, and he'd be too distracted to see the knife coming. Antonio's grip tightened on his weapon. Every word was a confirmation, every sentence another piece of the betrayal. "What about the girl?" another man asked. "Once Antonio's dead, she's leverage. The medallion connects to the Bratva operation from 2005. There are people who'd pay very well to ensure those connections stay buried." Vito checked his weapon with casual efficiency. "But first, we deal with Antonio, then we clean up the loose ends." Antonio had heard enough. He was calculating angles, timing, the best way to turn a 6-against-1 scenario into something survivable, when his phone buzzed silently in his pocket. A text from Sophia. "Don't you dare play hero. New plan. Trust me." Before he could respond, the main entrance burst open, but it wasn't Antonio's obvious arrival that Vito had been expecting. It was chaos. A delivery truck reversed through the entrance at speed, its backup alarm blaring, its driver apparently having confused forward and reverse. Behind it came two more vehicles, a taxi that seemed to have taken a very wrong turn, and what appeared to be a commercial laundry van that had definitely left its designated route. Vito's men scattered, shouting in confusion, weapons drawn but unable to fire with civilian vehicles careening through the space. And in the confusion, Antonio saw her. Sophia, emerging from the laundry van with the deliveries in hand and a maniacal grin on her face, yelling something about a massive order for the Castellano party that absolutely needed to be delivered right now. Was anyone in charge here? She was already 20 minutes late, and her boss was going to kill her. "What the hell?" Vito started, but Antonio was already moving. He came down the stairs fast, using the chaos as cover, his weapon trained on Vito's back. "Drop it, all of you, weapons down now." Vito spun, shock and fury warring on his face. "How did you—" "Service tunnels," Antonio said pleasantly. "You know, the ones that every delivery driver in Manhattan knows about, but you were too busy playing tactical genius to consider." He gestured with his gun. "Weapons, down, or I start with you and work my way through your men." The standoff lasted 3 heartbeats. Then Sophia, still playing her part brilliantly, tripped over a pipe and sent her entire stack of pizza boxes flying, directly into the nearest gunman. Hot cheese and tomato sauce exploded across his face, and his weapon clattered to the floor as he clawed at his eyes. That broke the stalemate. Antonio fired twice, precision shots that disarmed rather than killed, and suddenly Vito's men were scrambling, slipping on pizza grease, tangled in the chaos of vehicles and civilians, and their boss's furious commands. "Get out!" Antonio yelled at the delivery drivers, who needed no encouragement to flee. The taxi driver reversed through the entrance at speed, followed by the truck driver who'd apparently sobered up enough to realize he'd driven into a very bad situation. That left Sophia, still clutching her empty pizza carrier like a shield, standing between Antonio and Vito's remaining men. "Sophia, move!" Antonio commanded, but she was already moving, not away from danger, but toward the industrial shelving unit she'd clearly scouted earlier. She grabbed a support beam and pulled, and 2 tons of ancient factory equipment came crashing down, creating a barrier between Antonio and 3 of Vito's men. Vito himself had backed toward the service entrance, the one he'd planned to ambush Antonio through, but found his escape blocked by the laundry van that Sophia had strategically parked across the alley. "You should have stayed home," Vito snarled at Sophia, raising his weapon. "Should have been a good girl and let the men handle business." "Yeah, I'm terrible at following directions," Sophia said, and kicked a pizza box directly into his shin. It was such an absurd, unexpected move that Vito actually looked down in confusion, and Antonio closed the distance, disarming him with brutal efficiency. The gun skittered across the floor. Vito lunged for it, but Antonio was faster, colder, and absolutely done with betrayal. The fight was brief and vicious. Vito was skilled, well-trained, dangerous. But Antonio had 20 years of rage and a woman to protect, and that made him unstoppable. He slammed Vito against the wall once, twice, then held him there with a forearm across his throat. "The medallion," Antonio growled. "You said it connected to a Bratva operation. Tell me everything, or I swear to God." "It was a trafficking ring," Vito gasped out, his face purpling. 2005, the Bratva was moving girls through New York, and your sister was one of them. The medallion was in the evidence when they seized a safe house in Brighton Beach in 2006. Antonio's world tilted. "Evidence? You're saying the police had it?" "Dirty cops. They sold off everything valuable before the feds could audit. Your father's medallion ended up with a fence who sold it to an old Italian woman who thought she was buying prayer jewelry." Vito's smile was bloody, hateful. "Your sister was probably dead before they even raided that house, and you've spent 20 years chasing a ghost while building me an empire to take over." Antonio's fist connected with Vito's jaw once, hard enough to ensure he wouldn't be talking for a while. The man crumpled, unconscious, and Antonio stood over him, breathing hard, his hands shaking with adrenaline and grief and rage. Then Sophia was there, her hands on his face, forcing him to look at her. Antonio, look at me. We're okay. We're safe. It's over. He pulled her against him so hard she gasped, his face buried in her hair, his entire body trembling. You were supposed to stay home. You were supposed to be safe. I was safe. I had 3 delivery drivers, a taxi driver I bribed with $100, and a very detailed plan involving strategic pizza placement. Sophia pulled back enough to meet his eyes, and her smile was fierce and proud and absolutely beautiful. Also, you're welcome for the dramatic rescue. Very cinematic, if I do say so myself. Antonio laughed, a broken, almost hysterical sound, and kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning, like she was the answer to every question he'd been asking for 20 years, like she was his salvation and his doom and his future all wrapped into one impossible, extraordinary woman. When they finally broke apart, sirens were wailing in the distance, and Vito's men were groaning from various positions around the destroyed factory floor. We need to leave, Antonio said. Now. Before the police arrive and this gets complicated. Already called your cleanup crew, Sophia said, holding up her phone. Also called your lawyer, your security chief, and ordered Thai food for delivery to the Penthouse in about 45 minutes because I don't know about you, but near-death experiences make me hungry. Antonio stared at her. You're perfect. I'm efficient, Sophia corrected, but she was grinning as she grabbed his hand. Now come on, delivery boy. Let's get out of here before my dramatic rescue turns into a dramatic arrest. They disappeared into the tunnel system as the sirens grew closer, leaving Vito's failed ambush and 20 years of unanswered questions bleeding into the Manhattan night. The Penthouse had never felt so much like home as it did at 11 p.m., with Thai food containers scattered across the coffee table, and Sophia curled against Antonio's side on the leather couch, both of them still coming down from the adrenaline. Antonio's cleanup crew had been brutally efficient. Vito and his men were already in a secure location being debriefed, the factory was wiped clean, and the delivery drivers had been compensated generously for their trouble and their silence. The official story would be a dispute between rival construction companies, nothing to do with Antonio Moretti, respectable businessman. But the unofficial truth was sitting heavy between them. Unavoidable now. She was dead before my grandmother even got the medallion, Sophia said quietly, her fingers tracing absent patterns on Antonio's chest. Before I was born, before any of this. Antonio was silent for a long moment, his arm tightening around her shoulders. 20 years, he finally said. 20 years of searching, of becoming someone my family wouldn't recognize, of destroying lives and building an empire on blood, and she was already gone. You didn't know. I should have known. Antonio's voice was raw. I should have accepted it, should have let her go, should have lived a normal life instead of turning into a monster chasing ghosts. Sophia sat up, turning to face him fully. You're not a monster. You're a brother who loved his sister enough to spend 2 decades trying to bring her home. That's not monstrous, Antonio. That's devotion. Devotion that hurt innocent people, devotion that built criminal enterprises and corrupted officials and... He stopped, his jaw clenched. I told myself it was all for Maria, that finding her would make everything I'd done worth it. But she was gone the whole time, and I was just using her memory to justify becoming exactly the kind of person who could have taken her in the first place. Stop. Sophia cupped his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. You are not the same as the people who took Maria. You're not the same as Vito, who orchestrated all of this just for power. You're someone who loved so deeply that you couldn't let go. And yes, you made terrible choices, but you also spent 20 years protecting other people's sisters, other people's families, even if you did it through morally gray means. That doesn't absolve me. I'm not trying to absolve you. I'm trying to tell you that you're more than the worst things you've done." Sophia's voice was fierce now. "You think I don't understand guilt? I spent 15 years believing my mother abandoned me because I wasn't worth keeping. I built my entire life around being ready to run because I thought everyone would eventually leave. And then my grandmother showed up and gave me 3 years of love before dying and leaving me with a necklace connected to a dead girl and a mafia boss's obsession." Antonio's hands came up to cover hers. "Sophia, we're both walking disasters, Antonio. We're both carrying guilt for things that weren't our fault and making choices based on fear and trauma." She leaned her forehead against his. "But somewhere in the middle of your possessive declarations and my terrible delivery timing, we found each other. And maybe that's what healing looks like, not fixing what's broken, but finding someone who can hold the broken pieces with you." "When did you become so wise?" Antonio asked softly. "I've always been wise. You were just too busy being brooding and Italian to notice." Sophia smiled, and he couldn't help but smile back. "Also, I may have binged a lot of therapy podcasts during my delivery shifts. Turns out self-help content is very accessible when you're stuck in Manhattan traffic." Antonio laughed, a real laugh, the kind that felt like pressure releasing from his chest. "I love you. God help me, I love you so much. I love you too, even though you're a dramatic mess who kidnapped me over a necklace and then declared I was yours like we're in some kind of gothic romance novel." Sophia kissed him softly. "But Antonio, we need to talk about what comes next. Maria deserves to be brought home properly. Her family, your family, deserves to know the truth." "My father died 8 years ago," Antonio said quietly. He never stopped looking for her either. It destroyed him, piece by piece, until his heart just gave out. He paused. "But I have cousins, aunts, uncles, people who've been waiting as long as I have. Then we tell them. We use what Vito told us, the Bratva trafficking ring, the safe house in Brighton Beach, and we find out what really happened. We bring Maria home, even if it's just her memory." "We?" Antonio raised an eyebrow. "Did you think you were getting rid of me now that the dramatic, life-threatening situation is over?" Sophia shook her head. "Sorry, Moretti, you claimed me, remember? Said I was yours. Well, congratulations, you're stuck with me, through the healing, through the grief, through whatever comes next." Antonio pulled her onto his lap, holding her close. "I was an arrogant fool when I said that. You're not mine to claim. You're your own person, and you always will be." "True," Sophia agreed, "but I'm choosing to be yours anyway. There's a difference. One is possession, the other is partnership, and I've decided you're worth partnering with, despite your terrible communication skills and tendency toward dramatic declarations." "My communication skills are fine. You locked me in your penthouse and said, 'You're mine now,' instead of, I don't know, asking nicely if I'd help you investigate a 20-year-old cold case." Sophia poked him in the chest. "That's objectively terrible communication." "It worked, didn't it? Only because I have terrible self-preservation instincts and a thing for intense Italian men with tragic backstories." She kissed his jaw, his cheek, the corner of his mouth. "Lucky for you." "Lucky for me," Antonio agreed, and kissed her properly, putting 20 years of grief and guilt and desperate hope into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, Sophia rested her head on his shoulder, comfortable and safe in a way she'd never expected to feel. "We're going to be okay," she said softly. "It's going to hurt, and it's going to be hard, and we're both going to have moments where we spiral, but we're going to be okay." Antonio held her tighter, believing her despite everything. "Because we're extraordinary together." "Because we're extraordinary together," Sophia confirmed. "And because I make excellent strategic decisions involving pizza and chaos. That too. They sat in comfortable silence, the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond the windows, the future uncertain but no longer terrifying. For the first time in 20 years, Antonio Moretti wasn't chasing ghosts. He was holding the woman he loved and planning for tomorrow. It felt like resurrection. 3 months later, Sophia stood in Antonio's, their, penthouse, staring at the ring box he'd just placed in her hand with an expression that wavered between joy and absolute terror. "You're serious," she said. "I'm always serious," Antonio replied, which was no longer entirely true. 3 months of Sophia Edwards in his life had taught him how to smile, how to laugh, how to find humor in the mundane disasters of daily living. They'd found Maria, or rather, they'd found where Maria was buried, a small cemetery in Staten Island, where a Jane Doe from 2005 had finally been identified through the evidence from the Bratva safe house and Antonio's relentless pressure on law enforcement. She'd been given a proper funeral, surrounded by family who could finally grieve properly. It had been devastating and healing in equal measure. Antonio had cried for the first time since he was 16, and Sophia had held him through it. They'd both cried, actually, for Maria, for lost time, for the girl Sophia might have been if her grandmother hadn't carried the weight of that medallion. The investigation into the trafficking ring had led to arrests, to justice, to some measure of peace. Antonio had started the process of legitimizing his business operations, using his resources and connections for legal ventures. It was slow, complicated work, but Sophia was there every step, helping him navigate the bureaucracy with the same skills she'd used to navigate Manhattan's delivery routes. They were building something new together, something honest, and now he was asking her to make it permanent. "Sophia Edwards," Antonio said, taking the ring box from her trembling hands and opening it. The diamond caught the light, simple and beautiful, and probably cost more than her old apartment building. "You walked into my life delivering the wrong pizza to the wrong address, and you became the only right thing I've ever had. You're brilliant, brave, sarcastic beyond measure, and you saved my life in about 40 different ways." 40 is a bit of an exaggeration, Sophia said, but her eyes were already filling with tears. "It's not. I counted." Antonio took her hand. "You saved me from Vito's trap. You saved me from 20 years of darkness. You saved me from myself. And now I'm asking you to save me one more time by agreeing to spend the rest of your life reminding me that monsters can become men again, and that the best things in life come from the mistakes we almost didn't make." "That's the most romantic thing you've ever said, and it barely makes sense," Sophia said, laughing through tears. "Marry me. Be my partner, my equal, my light." Antonio's voice was steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "Be the only address I'll ever need." Sophia looked at him, this intense, complicated, devoted man who'd claimed her as his, and then spent 3 months proving he meant it as partnership, not possession. She thought about the girl she'd been 3 months ago, exhausted and alone, and convinced she'd never find anywhere to belong. "Yes," she said, "on one condition." "Name it." "We establish a foundation, a real one, with serious funding and serious purpose." Sophia's voice was strong now, certain. "A youth mentorship and employment program. We teach kids who are aging out of foster care, kids who are one bad choice away from the kind of life you escaped from, kids like I was. We teach them real skills, logistics, business, strategy. We give them legitimate paths forward so they never have to choose between survival and safety." Antonio stared at her. "You want me to fund a foundation that essentially trains young people to be better than I was? I want us to fund a foundation that gives young people choices." "Real choices." Sophia squeezed his hand. "We can't undo what happened to Maria. We can't change your past or mine, but we can make sure other kids don't fall through the cracks the way we did. We can build something that matters." "You're going to change the world," Antonio said wonderingly. "We're going to change the world," Sophia corrected. "Together, as partners, as equals, as people who understand exactly what it costs to survive and exactly what it takes to build something worth surviving for. Antonio slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that tasted like promise and possibility, and the kind of love that survived tragedy to find triumph. When they broke apart, Sophia was grinning. "So does this mean I get to redecorate? Because this penthouse is still way too much dark leather and not enough personality." "You can do whatever you want with it," Antonio said. "It's your home now, too." "Our home," Sophia corrected, and the word felt like magic. 6 months after that, they stood in the gleaming offices of the Edwards Moretti Foundation for Youth Development, surrounded by the first cohort of young people who'd been given chances they'd never thought possible. Sophia had designed the curriculum herself, drawing from her years of delivery driving, her literature degree, and her innate understanding of how to survive in a city that tried to grind you down. Antonio had provided the funding, the connections, the legitimate business partnerships that made it all possible. Together, they'd built something extraordinary. "You know what's funny?" Sophia said, leaning against Antonio as they watched a 17-year-old former foster kid give a presentation on urban logistics with confidence that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. "What?" "If I'd delivered that pizza to the right address, none of this happens. You'd still be chasing ghosts. I'd still be working 3 jobs. That kid," she gestured to the presenter, "would still be 1 mistake away from prison or worse." "The best mistake I never made," Antonio said softly. "The best mistake we both made," Sophia corrected. She turned in his arms, the ring on her finger catching the light. "You claimed me that first night, said I was yours." "I was an arrogant—" "You were right," Sophia interrupted. "I am yours, but not because you claimed me, because I chose you. I choose you every day. And I'll keep choosing you for the rest of our extraordinary, chaotic, beautiful life together." Antonio kissed her, soft and sweet and certain. Around them, young people who'd been given second chances were building futures worth fighting for. Behind them, 20 years of darkness had finally transformed into light. "To wrong addresses and right choices," Sophia whispered. "To partners," Antonio replied. "To us." They clinked imaginary glasses, grinned at each other like the disasters they were, and walked back into the foundation offices to change more lives. The pizza delivery had been to the wrong address, but it had been exactly the right destination.